This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. This is one of those cases that will have you yelling at your speaker, because once you hear what happened, and more importantly, what didn't happen, you'll wonder how in the hell no one has been held accountable. Today's story takes us to the high desert of Colorado, to a rural town surrounded by mountains, trees, and something way darker than anything on the map: corruption, cover-ups, and the cold-blooded murder of a brilliant 17-year-old girl named Candace Hiltz. She had a mind that could outsmart most grown adults, a quick wit and an even quicker tongue, and a big, fierce love for her family, especially her brother James, who struggled with mental illness and lived in near total isolation behind their home. And just days after confronting a sheriff's deputy and accusing him of taking bribes, Candace was executed in her bedroom, shot 7 times, her baby crying nearby, her body left under a comforter. What happened after that? Well, pretty much everything you'd expect in a story involving small-town law enforcement, sloppy forensics, and more than a few shady side characters. This is Death by Southwest, and today's case is the brutal murder of Candace Hiltz. Hi, guys. Hello, hello. We're trying this new cold open thing, or I'm trying this. I don't know why I say we. I'm trying this new cold open thing. I know it's been a minute, and if you are watching this, you may think that I look a little weird, and that is because I got a spray tan. And I haven't rinsed it off yet. And I also have this, let's see, I wonder if I can turn the camera and show you. I have, oh no, it won't do it because I have the AI background or whatever. Anyways, I have this smiley face lamp. It's like a big yellow smiley face, and it kind of casts a yellow glow on me. I usually try to turn it off, but I have all the blinds closed because there are painters here painting outside. So, and I don't want the dogs to go crazy, so fingers crossed. I got a spray tan because we're leaving tomorrow to go to a wedding. And just from walking my dogs, walking other people's dogs, I usually have pretty horrific tan lines. And I just wanted to try and get rid of them for the wedding. And I went to a fantastic spray tanner. I don't think I've ever had a spray tan in Tucson, like one where a person does it, stands in front of you. You don't just like stand in the machine. And spray tanning can be, depending on what you wear to your spray tan, like it's personal. Most people go topless at least, and you're just in a little pair of underwear, and you have to like bend over and this and this and this. So it's kind of personal. So it's nice when the person who's doing it is comfortable and easy to talk to and stuff. So I will put her Instagram in the show notes if there's anybody in Tucson who ever needs a spray tan. It was fantastic. She took her time, and I mean, I'll let you know once I rinse this off in a couple hours. But she also does facials and something called sugaring, which apparently I pictured was like just scrubbing somebody down with like a sugar scrub, but apparently it is like a form of waxing, like removing hair. Her name is Michelle. She's fantastic. I have her card, so I will grab that before this is over so I can mention the name of her little place. And it was wonderful. So enough about that. Just wanted to address that in case anyone is thinking that I put on way too much bronzer or something today. That's why. And I wanted to say thank you for everyone who reached out over the past week or so, or since whenever I informed everyone about my unplanned and unwanted pregnancy. and talked about, you know, how I was handling that and going to the clinic and getting an abortion and all the things that I was kind of hesitant to talk about. And then I was like, why? This is what's happening. More people should talk about this. And quite honestly, I think I'll do it separate than this because we're trying to keep true crime. But I will do perhaps a separate episode where I just talk about that experience I, because it's like I said, I had had one in the past, but this was very different than that experience. It was worse. Uh, and yeah, I just think that for those who, well, I don't, it doesn't matter. I'm going to talk about it because I want to talk about it. And I, as a 42-year-old woman, there were things that I didn't know about about getting an abortion, about the process, about all of it. And I've had one before. So I can only imagine, um, you know, a younger person trying to deal with this that they also wouldn't know, or a person my age, or an older person. I guess the age doesn't really matter. Anyways, it just should be talked about more. I feel like it should be talked about more, um, and it's not. So that will be on a separate episode, and I will end that now and say thank you. Thank you for the kind messages for that I've received. I am fine. Obviously, there was no podcast last week. I thought I would be fine to do one. I was not fine to do anything. It was a full week long process that was not comfortable. So no podcast last week, but here we are. True crime, not abortion. True crime is what we're talking. So let's jump in. Today's story takes us to a place that on the surface sounds like it could be the backdrop. Sorry, it's been a minute since I've been on the microphone, guys, so bear with me. I apologize. Uh, could be a backdrop for a postcard or maybe one of those westerns that you've seen on TV. It's called Canyon City, Colorado. And now Canyon is spelled Canon, and over the N, there's that little squiggle. I guess it's called a tilde, a tilde. Yeah. Uh, but most people, and so I don't know what that means. Canyon? It's not over the O, so that can't be right. I don't know how you would say the N with that if you're pronouncing it with the little squiggle over it. I will not be pronouncing it with the squiggle over it. I will be saying canyon. And that's apparently what most people say. Uh, So it is located, Canyon City, Colorado is located smack in the middle of the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, about 45 minutes southwest of Colorado Springs. Canyon City is a little town with big shadows. It's known as the climate capital of Colorado, which kind of sounds fake, but apparently it's real. And it's called that because it has unusually mild winters and very low humidity. It's dry, sunny, and surrounded by dramatic red cliffs and desert brush that looks kind of like it's from like a Western, like a Clint Eastwood film. But the most defining feature in Canyon City is not the rocks or the Rocky Mountains. It's actually prisons. This is a prison town. It's actually like the prison town because there are more than a dozen state and federal prisons in and around the area, including the famous ADX Florence, which is the federal supermax that houses some of the most dangerous people in the world: terrorists, mob bosses, domestic extremists, you name it. Locals jokingly call the area Prison Valley. I don't know if I would be joking about that if I lived here. I think it would be super scary to live in a place that's a pretty small town. There's about 17,000 people in Canyon City proper, but which is small. So living in a small place like that and then a dozen prisons around, oof, it's crazy to think that like the inmates outnumber the residents if you consider like all the nearby facilities, which is actually an exaggeration. They don't. According to a 2015 report, inmates made up about 38% of the combined population of Canyon City and Florence, with over 7,500 inmates in the area. But that was 10 years ago, so I don't have any more recent data. But let's just say there's a lot of inmates there. But not everyone in Canyon City is a guard or an inmate. There are families, schools, a historic downtown area, old mining roads, churches, and, plenty of people just trying to live quiet lives with scenic mountain views. And one of those people was 17-year-old Candace Hiltz, a bright, very smart, very bright teenager. And she had big plans, lots of big plans, but someone made sure that she never got to see those plans through. And this case, like I said before, in the cold open, it's it's maddening. It's the investigation, you can barely call it an investigation, is full of missteps and rumors and shady behavior. Um, and so we're going to find out what happened to Candace. Why was her murder so brutal and so personal? And so let's head into the deep shadows of Canyon City, Colorado. If there's a long pause, it's probably me drinking water. I'm trying to back away from the mic, and full transparency. I tried the last time I recorded true crime to go through and like cut out whenever I was drinking water. I couldn't find all of the places. We're leaving tomorrow. There's 80,000 things to do. I probably will not cut myself drinking water out of here. So don't think that something's wrong if there's a longer pause. It's just me drinking. Okay. Candace Hiltz was born just before Christmas in 1988, the youngest of 10 siblings. Yep, 10. She grew up in Canyon City, which I described as, I wrote this a while ago, a little blip in the southern part of the state that has about 16 prisons, I wrote, but I think it's more like a dozen. Um, when Candace was a baby, her parents laid her under the Christmas tree like a gift to the family because, in a lot of ways, she was being the youngest and she was a child prodigy. No exaggeration. She was doing calculus by age 11. She enrolled in college by 16. And though this is a questionable fact, I am going to share it. She was accepted into Stanford Law by 17. Some sources say that she planned to pursue law, but she was never actually accepted into Stanford Law. Other ones say that she was. So either way, this girl was smart. She wanted to be a Supreme Court justice, not an influencer or whatever. I guess there weren't influencers back then when the story takes place. Well, a little bit there were. Anyways, she didn't want to be one. She wanted to do something with that big brain of hers. She was smart. She was outspoken. She was often described as completely fearless, especially when it came to protecting the people that she loved. And one of those people was her older brother, James, who had severe psychological issues, extreme paranoia. He had a deep fear of people. And Candace was one of the only people who could kind of get through to him. He actually lived in what was described as a shack, kind of like a shack, I guess that's the best way to describe it, in the woods behind the family home. He didn't talk to anyone. He barely acknowledged his own family. But Candace was the one person that could kind of connect with him. And she was very, very protective over him. And it wasn't just James that she stood up for or her family. She stood up for her friends and even people that she didn't know. She once told some bullies on her school bus that she had bigger balls than all of her brothers combined. And considering that she had 9 of them, that was saying something. But Candace wasn't just brave. She was joyful. She was very loyal. She had a great kind of sarcastic sense of humor. She was athletic. And despite all odds, she was also a teenage mom. Her daughter Paige was born with a severe brain condition, hydrocephalus, which is an abnormal accumulation of cerebrospinal fluid in cavities of the brain. And doctors predicted that Paige would have very limited mobility and an incredibly short lifespan. Candace, being kind of the optimist that she was, she didn't care what the doctor said. She loved Paige and she was going to do everything to give her the best life possible. So she was juggling college, caregiving to her baby, and she made it clear she wasn't going to be defined by her circumstances. However, she was about to come face to face with something that even she couldn't outsmart. And his name was Deputy Robert Dodd. It's August 10th, 2006, and Deputy Robert Dodd, who was local law enforcement and often regarded as kind of just a jackass in general, he showed up at the Hiltz family home. Why? He was looking for James, Candace's reclusive brother who lived in the woods. A neighbor reported a trespassing incident supposedly involving James. Now, James, remember, he didn't like people. He didn't like to be around people. He didn't really talk to people. And he lived kind of like a recluse, like a ghost in the woods. But supposedly he broke into someone's house and stole a flashlight and a hatchet, which, okay, I mean, that's creepy-ish, but there's no actual proof of this. The stolen items weren't recovered and no charges were filed. Nonetheless, Deputy Dodd rolled in pretty hot to the Hiltz home. He was rude, he was aggressive, and he kind of bombarded Candace's mom, Dolores, with weirdly intense questions about James. But Candace, who was 17 and in her apparent third year of college, which doesn't actually make sense to me now that I'm reading that out loud because she enrolled at 16. She was in college at this point, though. She was also not willing to take any bullshit from Deputy Dodd. And she didn't just tell him that she wasn't going to take any bullshit. She said, I know what you're doing. I've seen you taking envelopes from drug dealers. I'm not afraid of you, and I'll go to the sheriff's department myself if I have to. And that's when things shift. Dodd was likely not used to being challenged by a teenage girl, and he was not happy about it. So he stormed out. 3 days later, the Hiltz family dog goes missing. Now, I know what you're thinking. How do we know that these are related? Dogs wander. Dogs jump a fence, get under a fence. Maybe it got out. Maybe it chased something. Maybe it'll be back. Sure. Apparently, though, this dog was not the wandering type. This type of dog never ran away. This particular dog never ran away and certainly didn't just vanish. And it was just weird timing that this happened days after the Hiltz family had basically a screaming match with a cop, with a deputy. So Candace decides to go to the sheriff's office and file a missing persons report. And who's working that day? Deputy Robert Dodd. The tension between them boiled over again, and another heated argument kind of erupted there. Candace went home. She was kind of shaken up this time, though. It was apparently like a pretty aggressive argument. She also she felt like something was off. And later, Candace's mom said that both of them felt like something was off. They just had like a weird vibe that day. They felt like they were being watched. They couldn't prove it, but that was the feeling they were getting. And there's a good chance that their feeling that something was off was absolutely right that day, because 2 days later, Candace Hiltz was dead. It's August 15th, 2006, and the morning it's a quiet morning, normal. Candace is home with her 11-month-old daughter, Paige. Dolores is heading into town to run a few errands. Now, while Dolores was out, she again got this weird feeling that, like, her and Candace had kind of been having over the past few days, past week. It was just, she couldn't shake it. She got this feeling that something was wrong. So she followed her gut and she called a neighbor and asked them to go check on Candace and the baby. Neighbor said they would, but apparently they didn't. Dolores got back home around 3:30 p.m. and walked into what can only be described as a living nightmare. She heard Paige crying, screaming, really, from the other room, which was already strange to Dolores because Candace never left Paige to cry. She would never just let her cry. So Dolores started walking through the house, and that's when she saw it. Blood everywhere, drag marks in blood, and no sign of Candace. So she grabbed Paige, and while she was holding her, she spotted something wrapped in a green comforter underneath the bed. She tugged on the blanket a little bit and pulled it, and there was Candace. Well, Candace's body. Shot 7 times, once in the chest, and this is graphic, 6 times in the head. So many times in the head that she was essentially decapitated. Dolores collapsed. She was holding Candace's hand and holding Paige, and she just sat there holding Candace's hand, waiting for the police to show up. And can you guess what police officer showed up to the scene? Deputy Robert Dodd. I mean, you can't make this up. Now, I get it. It's not that shocking. It's a small town. There probably aren't a ton of deputies, but come on. Candace is dead. Her baby is crying. Her mother is in shock. And Deputy Dodd, of all people, is now one of the people running this show, running this investigation. Immediately, red flags start flying because right from the beginning, this is not handled professionally, I guess is the word. I mean, this is not handled like anything I've heard of before. The crime scene was not secured, was never secured. Family, neighbors, people were just walking in and out of the house when they heard what happened. Nothing was taped off. Apparently, no evidence was bagged or preserved. It was like watching like a circus. No one was laughing, however. And somehow, even amid like this chaos of a crime scene that is not being run like any crime scene I've ever heard of, Deputy Dodd apparently already had a suspect in mind. James Hiltz, the brother who doesn't go into the house, is too paranoid to talk to anyone, and lives in the woods like a frightened deer. Now, like I said, it's no secret that he struggled with extreme mental illness. That mental illness included hallucinations and paranoid delusions. He occasionally had dealt with the Colorado Mental Health Institute. But murder? Now, what they determined at the scene, I'm going to tell you about in this clown car of an investigation. And then we're going to see, does it make sense that Dodd immediately went to James after you know this information? So Candace was shot with at least 2, but possibly 3 different guns. Plus, the shots came from multiple directions, some from in front of her and some from behind. Whoever did this gained access to the house, but James also had a way of getting into the house when he did want to go in the house. It was well known that he used a butter knife that he had hidden under the doormat, and he would pop the door open if no one was home with that butter knife. So that's how James always got into the house if he was going to go into the house, which wasn't often. But this time, the back door apparently was busted with a crowbar. So, unless James had like he's not violent either. Hallucinations, paranoid delusions, mental illness, absolutely, but never violence. So unless he like suddenly develops this like violent alter ego, and does he have a hidden collection of firearms that we don't know about? Has he been training as like a ninja in his spare time? I mean, you know what I mean? None of this makes sense. None of this points to him. However, none of that stopped Deputy Dodd and his team from launching a full-scale manhunt for James anyways. Now, we assume things can't get much worse or darker than this. And I'm not saying that this is making it worse, but this is dark. Remember, the missing family dog was found dead, tied to a tree, and killed with an axe, which just didn't feel random. Like it didn't feel like, how can that be an accident? That's not an accident. In my mind, there's no way that that is an accident. And it doesn't really feel random. It feels, if anything, like almost symbolic, maybe like a message. One theory that's been floated around is that the killer, whoever the killer was, got rid of the dog first so it wouldn't interfere with their attack on Candace. Or even though the dog wasn't found until after Candace was found, some people thought that the dog was killed like as a threat as to what would come next, and the killer had assumed the dog would be found before what happened to Candace. Either way, awful. Meanwhile, Dolores Hiltz was allowed back into her home within days of Candace's murder, which I don't know, actually. I feel like I should know this at this point in doing true crime. I don't know if there's any specific set amount of time that has to pass before family can return to their home if it's been the scene of a crime. I would imagine it just is when the crime scene has been processed and everything has been photographed and it's at that point it's done and safe for them to get back in. Side note, I watched a show called The Better Sister on Amazon. Loved it. Jenna also watched it and loved it. There's a crime in it. And at one point, you see some of the main characters in the show they're allowed to go back into their home, and there's blood everywhere, and they have to clean it up. Um, I guess you can hire crime scene cleanup crews that exists now, which is crazy. But if you don't, then it's left up to you to clean up your own loved ones' remains, blood, whatever else. And that just, I think I knew that, but how awful, how awful. So Dolores is allowed back in her home within days of the murder, even though there was no official forensic sweep, apparently. Plenty of key evidence had not been collected, and the home had not even been sealed off like in any kind of meaningful way. So when Dolores walked back into her home, she noticed all of this. She noticed that police didn't collect, I mean, like half of the things that they should have. Among the things that were left in the home and not like bagged, tagged, taken in, a bloodied computer monitor that was used to prop up the bed that Candace was placed under, bloody towels that were left outside the home, Candace's blood-soaked t-shirt, the green comforter she was found wrapped in, her dead body was found wrapped in, and a bullet casing in baby Paige's crib. I'm speechless, honestly. I don't have words for How? There's no way that any kind of law enforcement, anyone like worth anything, doesn't take the comforter that the victim was found wrapped in. It's mind blowing. Furthermore, Dolores had to practically beg the sheriff's office to come back and collect these items. She literally had to file a complaint and send photos of the evidence that they ignored. And then once friends and family caught wind of this, the public like put a little bit of pressure on as well. And finally, then the sheriff's office returned with a warrant. But when they do, I mean, the scene is compromised. The timeline is now muddied. Well, they don't, clearly I'm speechless. They don't know who's been walking in and out of here. They don't know what could have been planted, what was actually, I mean, it just is, oh, it's awful. Crime scene wasn't the only thing that was a disaster, unfortunately, in this case. Candace's autopsy was also kind of a mess. So here's what we do know is that there were 7 gunshots total, 1 to the chest, 6 to the head, at least 2 different calibers, maybe 3. Why is it a maybe 3? I don't know. Some bullets were fired after she was already dead. And then the coroner's report claimed that Candace's boyfriend found her body and took baby Paige outside before calling the police. Except Candace didn't have a boyfriend. And Dolores, Candace's mom, is the one who found her. This like detail in the autopsy report, it's completely fabricated. Never happened. It's just made up. So already there are so many contradictions, missing reports, unanswered questions, evidence that was never collected. It's like someone or several someones didn't want this investigation to go anywhere right from the beginning. Like it was meant to not succeed from the get. And maybe it was meant to never succeed because what happens next is just unbelievable, as if this all wasn't unbelievable enough. So we're going to flash forward 10 years to December 2016, 10 years after her brutal murder. Her case is still ice cold. No arrests, no suspects outside of James, who they looked at, and no justice for Candace. And the people who should have investigated it properly, the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, have long since moved on. Or so they thought. Because on December 17th, a guy named Rick Ratzlaff walks into a storage unit auction. You know, the kind where you like bid on abandoned units. You don't know what's inside. Storage Wars. Isn't that a show? I think. Yes, Storage Wars. That's what it's called. So this is going to be like Storage Wars, but darker. So Rick bids on a unit, no idea what's inside. He pays $50. He gets in there, opens it up, opens the storage up. Instead of furniture or books or whatever he thought he might find, he finds police lights, sheriff's uniforms, a blood-stained rope, a pair of bloody socks in a sealed evidence bag, an axe, and a manila folder labeled evidence, Candace Hiltz. All just sitting there in a storage unit that had been abandoned. This was concerning, obviously. So, step 1 was to figure out who had owned or rented, whatever, who had paid for this storage unit, whose name was on the paperwork. And can you guess whose name was on that paperwork? Deputy Robert Dodd. Now, Rick Ratzlaff, great name, happens to not really love the police. He's not a big fan of the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. He's had his own run-ins with them, and he personally believes that they're very shady. So instead of taking all of this and walking into the police station, he calls the police and asks them to come to him. They show up, and the conversation pretty quickly turned hostile. According to Rick and his wife, the cops tell him to keep quiet. Basically, like, don't talk about this, don't go public, keep it locked down. You can't say anything. Which is not exactly the response that you're like hoping for when you find evidence from an unsolved murder of a teenage girl. 10 years after that murder, you hand it over to the police and they tell you to shut the fuck up, basically. Seems weird. Now, Rick's wife, being someone who already thought the cops were shady, very smartly recorded the entire interaction. Unfortunately, that recording has never been released. But it is clear that something is amiss here. Because instead of the officers being like horrified, oh my God, how could this happen? Why is this in here? Maybe we can solve the case now, which are all reactions that one might expect. They're defensive. Instead of, wanting to investigate more, they're intimidating Rick and his wife. So Rick goes over their heads. Instead of giving it to them, he decides to turn the evidence over to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. And suddenly things start to change. On January 16th, 2017, Robert Dodd is placed on administrative leave. Investigators from the CBI are now digging deeper into Dodd, into Candace's murder, into everything. And their kind of deeper investigation led them to a local landfill because someone, who we are presuming is Robert Dodd, also was accused of dumping a computer, an evidence envelope with a DVD, a videotape of a sexual assault interview, a box marked unit forensic lights, and multiple other files and documents linked to Candace Hiltz' case. So, not only was evidence hidden in a storage unit, but more evidence was actively being destroyed. And the man who's pretty much at the center of all of this, Robert Dodd, still not a suspect. Still has not been named as a suspect. Now, even though he hasn't been named as a suspect, apparently the heat on him was becoming a bit too much for him to take. And on April 23rd, 2017, he retired, and I'm saying that with air quotes for those of you not watching, from the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, which apparently, I don't know any cops, really. Do I not? No, I guess I really don't. But I was told that retires sometimes means get out now before this gets uglier, basically. Now, handful of weeks later, he is charged, but not for murder, for abuse of public records, second-degree official misconduct, and criminal possession of identification documents. And I'll get to more on that in a second. No idea, but he pleads not guilty. He missed his first court date, and he still was sentenced to, drumroll, 15 days in jail. 15 days for hiding evidence in an unsolved murder and dumping sensitive materials from a sexual assault investigation into a landfill. Somehow that doesn't feel like justice. That feels like a slap on the wrist. Like a slap on the wrist from the teeniest, tiniest hand in the world. So the ID card that he was caught with, that was part of the criminal possession of identification documents. It belonged to a man named Heath Hyman, who just happened to be camping behind the Hiltz's family's neighbor's home at the time of the murder. And Dodd never reported it, never filed anything about this, never filed anything about finding this man's ID, this man who was camping essentially behind the Hiltz family home. It was behind the neighbor's home, but it was right there. Why? Sadly, I don't have the answer to that. That is a big question that many people want to know, including Candace's mom, because she believes that this Heath man may have been involved, and Dodd deliberately hid the evidence to frame James, the brother, instead. But as per usual with this case, and I mean, it shouldn't be usual, but it is, no one looked into it. Nothing came of it. So, despite all the, well, sketchy evidence or lack of evidence, I guess, because they didn't collect so much of it, the landfill looking for computers, which they found, the obvious corruption, no one has been charged with Candace's murder. Robert Dodd, who hid evidence, dumped files, and was the last person to argue with Candace before she was killed, he wasn't charged. Not Heath Hyman, the man camping behind the house, whose ID was mysteriously found in Dodd's storage unit. And not James Hiltz, the Candace's brother, who was apparently a suspect for years with zero physical evidence, no motive, and a documented mental state and mental illness that made it like almost impossible for him to orchestrate a murder of this scale. James was arrested days after Candace's murder, though, but not for her murder, on completely unrelated charges, apparently. And prosecutors tried to pin it all on him. He pled not guilty by reason of insanity. He spent 5 months in jail and eventually returned to the Colorado Mental Health Institute, where, believe it or not, he still lives today. But today he stays there by choice. Family accounts suggest that he's now a peer counselor and has found stability in the Mental Health Institute, and that gives him peace. And I think good for him. There's, of course, one more gut punch to this story, and that is Candace's daughter, Paige. She was never supposed to live more than a few days, but she lived for 7 years. She was loved and raised those 7 years by Candace's family, who saw Paige as kind of the last living piece of Candace. But on Thanksgiving Day in 2012, she passed away from complications related to her condition. She never walked, she never fully spoke, but her family did say that she just radiated joy and that they like to believe that she's running and laughing with her mom, Candace, now somewhere far beyond the reach of the cruelty that Candace endured. And Paige, I think this is amazing. She will continue to live on in the lives of other young children after Candace's family chose to donate her skin grafts, heart valve stems, and bone marrow. Dolores, Candace's mom, is still fighting to this day, kept fighting, and has begged the Attorney General's office to intervene, has filed formal complaints. No one listened. And so here we are with no suspect, no trial, no resolution. And what we do know is that Robert Dodd had motive, opportunity, and access to police weapons. He was last seen arguing with Candace, who threatened to expose him. And days later, she was murdered in a way that suggests coordination and, planning and then afterwards, he mishandled the crime scene, ignored evidence, stashed it in a storage unit, and tried to dump more in a landfill, and then apparently ran off to Texas. Yet no one said, maybe we should ask this guy some follow-up questions or look at him for the murder. Instead, they looked at the brother who lived in a shack, didn't own a gun, and was far too mentally ill to orchestrate something like this. And he kind of became the department's scapegoat. Heath Hyman, the creepy guy who was like staying in the woods, whose ID showed up in Dodd's, nothing ever happened to him. Nothing. Was never investigated. Did Robert Dodd kill her himself? Did he have help? Was it someone else entirely? Was it just completely random? We don't know. And we may never know. But in 2024, this case came back into the public eye because even though we didn't hear about it back at the time, in 2009, in the woods behind the Hiltz property, a small human bone was found near James Hiltz kind of like shack campsite. So it was found back in 2009 and nothing was done with it. It just sat untested, unexplained, unexamined for 15 years. This bone fragment that was apparently a human bone just collected dust in evidence until 2024 when the Cold Justice team pushed for DNA testing. The result, DNA matched Candace, and it was confirmed that the bone fragment belonged to Candace Hiltz, officially tying her remains to the area where her brother James lived. Now, when I found this out, I immediately like spiraled like, oh my God. Well, it wasn't Dodd. It was the brother. What other reason is there for a bone fragment being she was killed at the house. Why is her bone fragment way out by where he's living in the woods? Well, initially, one might think her body was moved. She was killed up there and then her body was moved to the house. But the original crime scene had drag marks in blood. Her body was found in a comforter under the bed. She was killed at the house. So that theory was debunked. But this bone fragment, I mean, it inevitably means that at some point, some part or piece of Candace ended up outside the house, which was enough to raise many eyebrows. Investigators immediately pointed to this as a key piece of evidence linking James to the murder, and they presented the case against James to the district attorney, but the DA declined to file charges, citing insufficient evidence for prosecution. And Dolores Hiltz still doesn't believe it. She maintains the belief that her son could not have done this, that he was mentally incapable. He did not have access to weapons. He had a continuous hallucination that his mom was an imposter, that she wasn't even real. So that's why he often would never go in the house. So the fact that he somehow found weapons, became mentally stable enough, and went into the house that he hated going into to kill his sister, who protected him and who was really the only person that he was close with, well, as close as he could get to people. It's ridiculous. It just doesn't make sense. Now, there are some loose ends that I have here. Well, I guess not that many loose ends. In a 2018, I just have this little piece. In a 2018 court hearing, Dodd claimed he stored evidence to take more photos later. Shut. I mean, come on. Why even say anything? Like, how ridiculous. Cold Justice team did find in their 2024 investigation that it didn't necessarily need to be multiple shooters. They debunked that theory and said that a single perpetrator could have actually used two guns. So, okay, could have been one person. Now, I thought I had this in my notes, but I don't. The bone fragment thing. One more thing on that because that it never went anywhere. Nothing was. I mean, it's Candace's bone fragment. Still today, no one has been prosecuted, arrested. Nothing has happened. I did read or hear because this really bothered me. Like, how did a bone fragment from Candace, who was murdered in the house, get way into the woods? And I want to say I heard this on a podcast. I heard them discussing that James could have heard the gunshots, gone to the house after the perpetrator left, and somehow picked up, like on his shoe, on the bottom of his shoe. You know, that's the most likely, but tons of different ways. He could have picked up this small bone fragment and just didn't even know it. Like he didn't pick it up with his fingers, it just attached to the bottom of his shoe or the top of his shoe or his pant leg or whatever. And he then, saw what happened, be having the mental capacity that he does, he just went back to his shack in the woods and it fell off of his shoe. That actually seems feasible to me. Also, could have been Dodd. Dodd could have killed her and then either purposely or unintentionally gone up, gone to where James is living in the woods and either placed the bone fragment or gone there to place other evidence and the bone fragment was on Dodd and it fell off when he got to James, where James was living. It could have been carried by someone like on their shoe, on their clothing by accident. And that's how it ended up there. And to me, that seems so much more realistic than her brother doing this. So I would love if you have any thoughts or theories on that. I would love to hear them. If you have any information about the murder of Candace Hiltz or the mishandling of her case, contact the Colorado Bureau of Investigation at 303-239-4201. I will put that in the show notes. And if this case pissed you off as much as it pissed me off, good, because that's the point of telling this story. And I hope, I think it has been on many podcasts. Maybe you've heard it before, but I hope it continues to be told, and that people stay angry about it and keep talking about it. And hopefully someday something will be determined about Candace's murder and get justice for her and her family. And that is it for today's episode of Death by Southwest. If you are loving Death by Southwest, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, or come say hi on Instagram or TikTok. And as always, stay curious and stay safe out there. And come back next week for more true crime. You can also find me on Patreon, where I usually do an extra, almost every week I do an extra bonus, just chit-chatting episode. Last week I didn't. Last week I did nothing, guys, except for try to survive. So Patreon, my lovely, lovely friends on Patreon, I apologize. I completely neglected you last week and did not even open Patreon. But as soon as I'm back from this wedding, things will be back to normal. on Patreon and here. So thank you guys for listening. As always, again, thank you so much for your support with all the personal things that I share on here and all the personal trials and tribulations of my life. I really appreciate you, you supporting me and you continuing to listen. So thank you. Thank you. And I will talk to you guys soon. Love you all. Bye.
Death by Southwest is hosted by Jenna Schneider and Margot Carmichael.
Executive produced by Margot Carmichael.
Produced by Jenna Schneider.
Audio editing and sound design by Margot Carmichael.
Music by Soundstripe.
And a special thanks to Edward R. Murrow for letting us borrow his famous sign-off phrase, "Good night and good luck."